I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Napa Valley Special Series 2023. Across these 5 episodes, we'll be exploring the Napa Valley scene through the lens of 5 very different wineries, giving us an incredibly detailed and up-to-date snapshot of this fascinating region via its people, land, and winemaking. Make sure you subscribe to Interpreting Wine wherever you're listening so you don't miss an episode. We close out the series today in the company of Steve Matthiasson of Matthiasson Wines. We hear Steve's origin story and he introduces us to the people at Matthiasson before talking vineyard philosophy and viticulture, adaptations he's made to climate change, converting conventional vineyards to organic, the changing flavours of his wines during climate change, a deep dive into winemaking at Matthiasson, and where these wines are being enjoyed in international markets. Enjoy.
So Matthiasson Family Vineyards, Matthiasson Wines, we started, our first vintage was in 2003. That was after about a decade of my wife, Jill, and myself working in the sustainable agriculture field. So Jill worked for a nonprofit called the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, which was, focused on sustainable agriculture and saving family farms. At that time in the 90s, local food was not the cliche that it is now. It was pretty groundbreaking. And there's a lot of work on teaching farmers how to sell directly to chefs, encouraging cities to allow farmers markets with, their health and safety regulations would be preventing that. And just a lot of it was very much a mission of trying to preserve family farms and get back to a healthy diet. And if you think about all the stuff Alice Waters has been talking about for decades, the edible schoolyard and bringing people together around seasonal produce and gardening and all the good things that come with that for individually and societally, that was a mission. And so my wife worked for over 10 years at a nonprofit doing that. And I was working in, I wanted to be an organic farmer, and I was able to get a job without having a farm or any money or any ability to start farming. I was able to get a job working for a consulting company that helped farmers reduce their pesticide use. So I would go around vineyards and orchards and check for bugs and check the soil and give reports to the farmers basically on the findings. And that was kind of how I got started. And so the reason I'm starting with this little background is that then the last 20 years of Matthiasson, our wine has to be understood through the idea of local seasonal produce, because that's what we think that we're making when we make wine. Mm-hmm. So we didn't start with like a deep base background in the wine industry or with understanding the great wines of the world or the classification systems in Bordeaux. That there is a difference between a noble variety and I guess an ignoble variety, or like a deep reverence for Burgundy. And it was more, we're local food people, initially we wanted to be farmers. We finally figured out how to get involved in agriculture and organic farming. And so we were home winemakers, just like we were home tomato paste makers and canners and home peach jam makers, because part of our agrarian lifestyle that we were, so passionate about finding for ourselves was, preserving the bounty of the seasons as part of growing fruits and vegetables. And so home winemaking was no different to us than like gathering olives and taking them to the community mill for making olive oil from some olive trees we had access to. So that was kind of the mindset. But career-wise, I got deeper and deeper into wines. And ended up working. Lodi Wine Grape Commission hired me to write the Lodi Wine Growers Workbook, which was kind of they got a grant and for this, and it was sort of a kind of a formative sustainable agriculture book that I got to be a part of with a really great guidance committee, and it was sort of a deep dive for me into viticulture. Before that, I'd been working on grapevines, peaches, almonds, walnuts, more of an organic farming perspective. So that working in Lodi was this viticulture deep dive, which really kindled a lot of interest and passion in viticulture specifically, and a lot more interest in wine. And I thought wine became more than just a part of our Mediterranean diet and our lifestyle. It was more like I got really interested in it, and ended up working for after that, working for a winery doing viticultural research, which was a really deep dive before then in wine quality and climate change adaptation, and then came to Napa to start our own consulting company with some partners, and then we started Matthiasson, the winery, based on now better understanding of how the wine industry works, and we thought, you know what, we can throw our hat in the ring, and we have a point of view, and we have something that we'd like to do with wine, which is kind of go back in time a bit to a little bit more of a food-oriented, balanced style of wine that really reflects California produce and the purity of the fruit, and what wine can taste like when it's grown like an heirloom apple or like a heirloom carrot, with that reverence for the just clean, pure flavors of the fruit grown in healthy soil. So that was kind of the original idea. And so now we have 20 years of our wine business, and it's grown and it's turned into a fairly mature business at this point. But that's really our mindset still to this day. So, we're not making Rolex watches for collectors. We're making wine that was grown in a certain season that hopefully will get consumed at the table, with people having also other fresh vegetables and fruits, and healthily, equitably, carefully grown meats, and have a wonderful meal of whatever is seasonal at that time. That's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I love it, and it's totally taken me back to an experience that I had around 10 years ago now, over in New South Wales, over in Australia, when I volunteered at a permaculture education center over there, and I kind of did my fair share, which might be news to some people. Working down in the produce garden, and getting involved in harvests, and luckily we had an on-site chef, so we had the facility within a sort of 100 meters or so to pick all of this amazing produce, and then roll it up the hill and hand it over to somebody who had the skill to turn it into something mind blowing. So totally get that placement really of, I guess, first grapes, and then grape juice, and then fermented grape beverage in that context. It totally makes a lot of sense. But I think where it would be interesting to sort of take things on. You mentioned Jill already, but I think what would be great really would be just to understand really the people who make up Matthiasson then now, because I know that you've got a team there, and you've got quite different roles. So maybe introduce us to some of the other key people who are involved in that process of then turning those grapes into wine and getting it out there into those tables and those situations that you talk about.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, it's great that your experience working at this permaculture market garden. So exactly that there's a whole ethos around this idea, right? Yeah. And so so as so Matthiasson, now we've always been a family business. So, my wife, Jill, if you've ever worked for a nonprofit, that it's a lot of hours. And so when we had our second kid was when she decided to scale back and not work giant hours. And so that was coincided with starting Matthiasson in 2003, so that she could run the business out of the house while, get the kids to school, make them a healthy lunch, come back, try to figure out how to run our business, sell wine, pay bills, and before going picking the kids up again. And so, and I was, doing the winemaking, and she did the business side, and that's kind of how we started it. And that's still how we do it. So, so the way our business is split up is now we have about 20 employees, which kind of blows my mind. And we own 3 vineyards, and we lease 11 vineyards that we farm. So we're farming, a total of about 80 acres. So that's about, let's say, for in England, UK, I guess they still use some acres, but also like in hectares, that's probably like 35 or something like that. So we also sell fruit to other wineries. and so so Jill runs the business, and that's, we sell our wine all over the world now, 25 countries and 45 states. It's complex. That she runs all of that, and all the accounting and paying bills and all of that good stuff on the business side, as well as all the sales and all of our wine club and our tasting room. And I run the farming and the winemaking, and we kind of collaborate on getting the story out about us. But she's always the one that's holding down the fort, always has been the whole time. We have our vineyard crew. So it's really important, to me and to Jill, that that our farm labor is full-time, year-round part of our community. So it's not migrant laborers. And they're paid, well, and we have, everyone has the same benefits. Here in the U.S., we don't have nationalized health care, so it's something that we offer health insurance to every single one of our employees, everyone in the vineyard, the winery, everything. So that's really important to us. So our vineyard crew are full-time here in the community. There are 7, actually 8 now, full-time vineyard people. So like right now today, we're pruning. And if we get a slow time in the vineyard or it's rainy, they can move into the cellar and like bottle or label or package or something like that. And so we try so that way no one gets laid off. They're just employed year round, other than, vacation time, paid vacation. But then we have our tasting room. So, we're in Napa Valley. A big, really important thing for a winery around here is we have to have a tasting room. Because it's an important part of our business. We have the advantage of have all the tourism here. And so take advantage of that, and it's a nice balance. Like, for example, when the pandemic shut all the restaurants down, we were able to pivot to our mailing list and stay going through 2020. So that was it's really important for us to have that stability, the balance between wholesale and retail. So the tasting room, we have on winemaking, we have 3 full-time for, just to be for, making wine, racking. We have a lot of work, obviously, at harvest and racking and bottling and toppings and all that good stuff. And we have our office. So we have to have a couple people that, pay bills and keep everything organized. And so that's the whole Matthiasson team.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's and again, it kind of does keep coming up. Really, Steve, across these episodes, the way that people treat their crew, the keeping people employed, and looking after the people that are the lifeblood really of the community over there. It's definitely come up in many of the conversations, and happy to hear that. And I think what would be super interesting. I mean, I know we spoke a bit before we turned on the microphone about the things that really excite you, and the things that really kind of float your boat. And I think that you've given me just there a great way to segue into those. So I know that viticulture is certainly it's your bag, if you like, and that's the thing that you specialized in, and that's the thing that still gets you out of bed in the morning. And I think that talk to us about those different vineyard sites then, because I think that would be the way to bring those elements together, the business and the viticulture. What does that look like in terms of acquisition? In terms of choosing those sites, and then potentially, how has what you do on those different sites changed in relation to changes over that time, and most notably perhaps the climate change.
Yeah. So sites are a funny one, because I kind of think of vineyards are sort of like children, and so none of them are the same. I'm not as much of a believer of sites being greatly better than other sites. Mm-hmm. Just like, again, some have more abilities in certain areas and others have more abilities in other areas. And that's kind of how I look at it. Mm-hmm. And so you can't ask every site to do the same thing. But so the idea with viticulture is kind of is kind of trying to identify what's great about a site and coaxing that out of it. And if you're lucky, the right variety is planted there, but it might be that you're going to always fight Cabernet in that site, but it's a great Chardonnay vineyard. And so, in California, we have it's a lot more open, obviously, in terms of what you can plant where. And so it's a double-edged sword. You have a lot of cases where you have the wrong variety in a certain site, but you also have a lot of cases where you can get outside the box and really think and put something totally unexpected in a site that could do really well there, because we don't have the rules. So, but anyway, we really look at these sites and think about, okay, what's great there. And that's what I think viticulturally. And we have so many different tools in our viticultural toolbox to work with the site. I mean, the type of cover crop that we plant, if we could go to deep-rooted perennial no-till grasses, or we could plant the other extreme would be lots of peas and beans and vetch that we till in like as green manure. And those are hugely, either one of those extremes could transform a site in terms of how the vines grow. In one case, the no-till grass restricting the vine growth and getting water out of the soil and turning an overly wet site into a site that has a balanced supply of moisture for the vines. Conversely, a site with very either compacted, over-farmed soil or just thin soil, a kind of a green manure crop, the vines could grow much better. So we have all these really good tools, even within organic farming.
Yeah.
Crop green harvesting. We have 2 Chardonnay vineyards, Linda Vista Vineyard, Michael Mara Vineyard. The Linda Vista Vineyard crops in at 8 tons per acre. Michael Mara crops in at 2 tons per acre. So we don't have a rule that low crop is better, and we don't have a rule that big crop is better. Our rule is finding balance. And so that's going to be site by site. So based on all that, I have this general philosophy of working with a vineyard site. And so what we don't have is a lot of money. And so it's not like we're not like an oligarch that basically has identified these certain sites that are great, and then we just offer them enough money that they'll sell them to us. So we take what we can get basically and then work with it. And so as we've built our business, we've had opportunities to get our hands on pieces of land. And if I feel like there's some greatness there that could be uncovered, most of the time they're a diamond in the rough, because that's how we were able to get our hands on it. If it's already making great wine, it's probably already owned by someone that is willing to pay for that. So you find these diamonds in the rough, and I think, if we change the cover crop, or we replanted it, or we changed how it's pruned or how it's cropped, or we changed the trellis, or we changed the way, we split it into 2 and feed them the 2 sides differently. There's lots of different ways to uncover what's great about a site that may not have been uncovered yet. And so we've ended up, so what'll happen is a realtor will sell a property and someone will buy it. And so I still do vineyard consulting. So Ian Reed Signorello, he's one of my vineyard consulting clients. Not on the winemaking, just on the vineyard viticulture practices. So I've been doing that now for here in Napa for over 20 years. And so at this point, I know a lot of people. And so sometimes when people buy a vineyard, the real estate agent used to hire me to go write a report on the vineyard. So I know all these real estate agents. I know that vineyards all up and down the valley. And so someone might say, "Hey, I just sold this vineyard. It's a really cool site." They don't know what these people, they're retiring to Napa. They don't know what they're going to do with the vineyard. You want me to introduce you to them, and I'll meet them. And I'll say, "Hey, can we, they're like, oh, we looked you up and we bought some of your wine. We love your wine." And I say, "That's great. How about, I'd love to farm your vineyard. We'll farm it organically. And then we work out a rent basically. And maybe it's 20% of the crop. Maybe it's a barrel of wine from their vineyard. Maybe it's a small vineyard and they're just happy that we farm it and take the fruit and it's being well taken care of." And so we sort of accumulate these land that we farm. And if I look at it, I go, you know what, that's going to be really difficult to make our style of wine from that site. I might pass on it. But if I think, what, I see immediately what needs to change, and I know this is going to be exactly what we need for our wine. and then we add another vineyard on, basically. Or we say, you know what, we'll just sell the fruit to another winery, but it keeps our farming staff busy, and we get the critical mass of vineyards to farm that we have, because we have to buy equipment and all that stuff. You need a certain amount of acres to justify it, and we'll look at it that way.
Very cool, very cool. And but in the time that I've got you, I'd love you to talk about again something that we spoke about before we put the mic on, which is that idea of, I guess, adaptation of a vineyard site. Keeping true to those types of wines that you set out to make, and evidently are still making, those sort of more food friendly wines, I guess a sort of a fresher, purer expression. But yeah, you I believe wanted to talk about what might be some of those tools or levers that you have to pull from a viticultural sense to maybe keep that purity of expression even when the temperature starts going up, and kind of continue on the trend that we seem to be on at the moment with climate change. So I just love to delve into that topic a bit more. Yeah, I mean, there's so much talk in climate change about switching varieties, and I feel like that's such a massive shift, and there's so many things that can be done viticulturally to adapt to climate change before you have to switch varieties. Mm-hmm. One thing is just if you are replanting a vineyard, which hopefully we don't do very often, we almost because it's high carbon footprint, high cost. It's nice to work with what you have. But let's say you're replanting the vineyard, deeper rooted, more drought tolerant rootstocks. For the last 30 years of viticulture, the philosophy has been the weakest rootstock you can get away with on the site to have vines that grow less and have smaller berries, more concentration of fruit. Mm-hmm. But now the mentality is, what's the strongest rootstock we can get away with on the site, so that we hopefully don't lose too much concentration, but we gain a ton of resilience for the drought years and the heat spikes, and especially planning for the future. So rootstock, row orientation. It used to be you planted, if you had the ability, you planted north-south to maximize photosynthesis, so that the sun was on both sides of the vines. Mm-hmm. We've kind of now thrown that out, and we're planting northeast, southwest, because we want to balance the heat load. So we have more photosynthesis than we need. There used to be more overcast days and cool weather, so now we have more photosynthesis than we need. So we don't need. Why don't we maximizing photosynthesis? Just means more sugar, which we already have too much sugar. Our alcohol levels have gotten too high. So instead, it's about the heat load on the fruit, balancing the heat load, so that because when the fruit overheats, that's when the negative flavor changes happen. So the fruit is dark colored. It picks up sun, and it loses anthocyanins. That's the color. It loses fruity flavors. It gains jammy flavors, raisiny flavors. It loses acidity. And so our goal is to keep the fruit cool, the fruit temperature cool. And so we northeast, southwest, the sun, the hottest time of the day, the sun is overhead, and the grape is shielded underneath the leaves. Mm-hmm. Also putting cross arms on the vines to spread the canopy out, putting cross arms on the trellis. The old way of thinking is you want to have a thin canopy so that you can have more light and airflow, and so you have less disease pressure. Mm-hmm. But disease pressure goes down as it gets hotter and drier, and instead our problem is shielding the fruit from the sun. And so even if and then trying to change the mentality that we can accept a little, this is an aside, but accept some diseases, whether, the fungal diseases, some botrytis, some powdery mildew is okay. And so there's this thinking in our industry that you can't have anything. Mm-hmm. And it's trying to find an acceptable level. And so we can spray less, but what that allows us to do is spread our canopy out more and have more shade over the fruit. So like a lot of times they have the vertical shoot position, that's a straight up and down canopies, and we just bolt on cross arms and spread it out as far as we have space in the rows. It might be 12 inches, might be 36 inches. It totally depends on how much space we have, but try to get the spread out so it's in the shade. There's organic farming is huge, because a lot of the conventional farming
the plants don't have as developed of a root system because they are fed fertilizers on a regular basis. So the plants aren't stupid. They don't grow roots if they don't need roots. That takes energy. So organic farming, and the old motto with organic farming is feed the soil, not the plant. So rather than injecting fertilizers in, the idea is to have healthy soil, and then the plant gets what it needs, but it has to go find it and build a bigger root system so that it's more buffered when you have these heat spikes. Mm-hmm. Also, you also have more good bacteria and fungi living on the roots, which train the immune system of the plant to ripen the phenolics of the fruit faster. So you don't have to wait for high sugar levels for the phenolics to be ripe. So, the phenolics are actually part related to the immune system in the plant. And so just like we have microbiome in our guts, plants have microbiome on their roots. So that's really important for adaptation, is thinking about that, or get healthy soils and organic matter turnover helps the plant resiliency when you have bad weather.
And that's then specifically, like, if that happens as a result of focus on the soil rather than anything else that specifically focus on the.
Yeah. So rather than feeding the plant synthetic fertilizer close to which tends to be then closer to the surface, and then the plant because the plant, in order to get fertilizer naturally, it's these little microbes have the right enzymes and acids to be able to weather the soil and get the fertilizers that are locked up in little soil particles. Mm-hmm. And so all plants naturally exude sugars and food out of their roots, mainly sugars, to feed the bacteria. And then when the bacteria die, the nutrients that they extracted from the soil are released, and the fruit sucks, the root of the vine sucks that up. Mm-hmm. And so that's how plants work in nature. So if we feed them with synthetic fertilizer, the grapevine is less inclined to release sugars to feed its microbiome because it has what it needs. So instead, it'll use its sugars to grow, and you get more vigor, which is one of the ways that fertilizers work. Mm-hmm. And you get more leaves, but less roots. And so it's missing out on all of the messaging it gets from the bacteria, because the bacteria literally and the fungi literally release little molecules that go into the root to tell the root, hey, we have a pest, or hey, we're running out of water, or hey, nitrogen is not as available as it was. And then the plant takes that into consideration and adapts. So it might, when they tell the plant that it's running out of water, the plant might turn its leaves away from the sun to make sure that it conserves its moisture. Mm-hmm. So part of that adaptation is the skin thickens up on the fruit, and it packs in more color and tannin, and it's missing that signal. If they're not feeding their microbes, they're not getting as strong of a signal. So then you get some terrible heat wave in August, and the plant isn't resilient because it hasn't toughened up through it having a healthy immune system in association with its microbiome. Fascinating.
And the thing that comes to mind, actually, Steve, is a friend of mine, a winemaker in Rioja. He's based over there in Rioja Alavesa, David San Pedro. Shout out to David. But I visited him. I've interviewed him and interviewed his wife over there, and I've been reliably informed that they and he is basically trying to farm in a related way, as minimal inputs as possible, bringing horses back into the ecosystem, a complete different approach to farming than many others there. But what they told me was, when he really took on new vineyards, which had maybe been farmed for many years with synthetic fertilizer, he would take a very kind of hardcore approach. He would pretty much make them go cold turkey, and as a result would be open and would be accepting that he was going to lose a percentage of the plants. And I'm just curious, because presumably you've been in a similar situation where you've taken on a plot which at some point in the past had been farmed with fertilizers. I'm just curious about that that transition, and your view on, and your best thinking now on how to sort of manage and mitigate that change.
Yeah, well, many times I've converted conventional vineyards to organic many times, and it's a 3 to 5 year process for the soil to start coming into balance and the vines to adapt. We do go cold turkey, because when you're starting to go organic, you start the clock and you say, okay, this is it. So I don't tend to wean the plants off or try to. Some people's philosophy is spend a year dealing with problems, so they might use a lot of Roundup and try to kill as many weeds as possible and clean up before going organic. And I don't personally. My attitude is we're going organic because we believe in organic, and so the last thing I'm going to do is use a bunch of chemicals to facilitate going organic. That doesn't, for me personally, it's not logical. So we go cold turkey. However, the goal is to immediately start improving the plants, not have them go into a slump and come back. So we have to, take care of them initially, and that might, so compost applications. There are organic fertilizers that we can use. My goal is over time to wean off compost and organic fertilizers. So, the goal is all fertility is generated on site with the use of the cover crop. And compost is very precious. And so I don't want to rely on compost for our annual fertility. We use compost as needed to sort of, I call it priming the pump. The soil is just kind of in a doldrums, and sometimes compost can wake it up and then get this processes going. But our goal is to use our cover crop. So, but initially you might have to use compost. You might have to use some organic fertilizer, and kind of keep things going as you start to work on this, improving the soil quality and the soil health. And generally the transition organic is we're taking over the whole aspect of the vineyard, because it's not just what we're farming, it's all the years of working in consulting. So you work on also improving the pruning and also improving the timing of operations, so like you can shoot thin earlier, for example. If you're going to go in and shoot thin, which is removing all the shoots that you're not keeping, it's the viticultural calendar, you prune, and then a bunch of shoots grow in the spring, and you have to thin them off and keep the ones that we call them the count shoots. So you thin off because it looks like a little furry thing initially, then you thin it, and then later on you put the shoots in the wires, and green harvest and then harvest. Those are kind of the main things. So shoot thinning, a simple thing like shoot thinning, if you do it later, the shoots have grown more before you remove the shoots, and so more of the energy has been taken away from the plants, because less is going into the ones that you're keeping, because it's been diluted into all those extra shoots. Yeah. If you do it earlier, the shoots you're keeping will tend to grow more, because you got all those extra competitive shoots off when they were little. So there's lots of little details that can have profound influences on how the plant grows. So if we're going to convert a vineyard over organic, for example, it's probably going to be one of the first ones that we shoot thin to make sure that we get good growth. And then a vineyard that's, and we kind of prioritize. And so there's a lot of the little viticultural tactics that go into the conversion of organic to where the vines can hopefully continue to get better and not go through a slump.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I may be stating the obvious, but presumably then if it has been kind of farmed, quite, traditionally, or, quite well, not traditionally, but, if it's been farmed with a lot of fertilizer and a lot of inputs, shall we say, again, correct me if wrong, that's going to mean that the soil is going to be less healthy. And maybe then in the cover crops during that transition, the focus is more on the sort of peas, legumes, things that can sequester nitrogen and rebuild the soil. Would that be, broad strokes?
Yeah, totally, exactly.
Yeah.
We, start to build, and then as that's all turning over, and you're like, wow, the vines are growing great. And then the vines get to a point where maybe in year 3 or 4, they're growing a little too much. That'll be a chance to then switch cover crops to no-till, and then kind of settle into a nice, cruising altitude.
I love it. And, I'm sure you do as well. And your customers, all love wine as well. And I think, what would be fascinating. I mean, I've written down here to remind myself. I've written down taste in conversion, because presumably through that process, there's still wine being made from those plants. And I'm just curious, what might be some of the changes, evolutions in terms of the flavor of either the grapes or the finished wine that you're getting, as that, I guess, that ecosystem evolves, becomes more self-sufficient, and I guess remembers how it was sort of designed to interact with the ecosystem.
Well, the crazy thing that we've learned with our wines is, as the years have gone by and we're getting better and better at our viticulture, even though the climate is getting warmer, the wines are getting more precise, more focused. Our alcohols are going down, not up, which is amazing. Our acidity, we're getting more acidity, and it's sort of like the opposite path. There's like the global warming path of wines getting heavier, dark fruit, higher alcohol, less acid, and that's sort of that. We see that all over the world. We see that tons of examples of wines getting heavier and heavier and heavier as the years and decades roll by. And so our wines are doing the exact opposite, where they're getting brighter and more aromatic and more, moderate alcohol as the years are going by, despite the climate, because we're learning faster than it's getting warm at how to grow grapes and make wine. So it's really exciting.
And again, you put that back to, it's not sort of black magic. It's actually all due to all of the things that we're talking about there. Just paying attention, giving the ecosystem what it needs to be able to make those adaptations that are then presenting themselves in terms of the wine and the flavor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, our winemaking is incredibly simple. We all of our harvest is done by our full-time employees. So we harvest our vineyards many, many times. So that's one key is that we don't wait for and especially on Cabernet is like one of the hardest varieties to control alcohol on in our climate. So with Cabernet, we harvest individual vines as they appear ripe. We don't harvest the vineyard, and because if we wait for the last vines to get ripe, then their first vines are too ripe, and we get the black jammy flavors that we don't want and high alcohol. So one of the great things of having a full-time crew is we can look at a vineyard and we can see individual vines that you can look at the leaf color and you can look at the way the fruit is, and I'll say this vine is ripe. This next one over, bright green leaves, the fruit's still real crispy, not ripe. And so we pick individual vines, and then we come back maybe 2 or 3 times. And so that's really important for us for making wine. And they're not picking any bad clusters. So then we get to the winery, we don't do any sorting in the winery. We don't need to, because we picked it all ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so harvested it all ourselves. And so we get to the winery, it's super simple. Destem the fruit into a tank, ferment it with 2 or 3 punch downs or pump overs per day, depending on the tank, press it. Native yeast, and it goes to barrel, and and then we rack and blend and bottle, basically. So the winemaking is very simple, but it can be simple because we have impeccable fruit that we're picking exactly when we want to pick it. That's the key.
I love it, and kind of as we unfortunately look towards closing, Steve, I'd really love to ask you about how the wines are received internationally, because I know that you're exporting in the UK with Nectar, and I'm sure in lots of other markets. But maybe because I know the wines of Nectar, and they're from the UK. I'm from the UK. Maybe talk a bit to, I guess, that relationship, but then also how the wines are received there, and the feedback you're getting, because I'd love to know how that's maybe changing something else that you mentioned in your kind of pre-work, where you spoke about getting the word out to people to understand that Napa Valley in California is a really great place to grow grapes, not just for those ripe, powerful extracted wines, which I think yours are nothing like that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the Napa Valley is this magical place to grow grapes. And when we have this amazing climate, just with having the ocean right there, that cold Pacific Ocean bringing the breezes in, and then you have, warm days, but then it cools down again at night with the breezes, and it's unbelievably consistent. So it's a magical place to grow grapes, and it allows a lot. And so one thing it allows is picking very ripe every single year. And so when people like, some of the big bold wines that we're known for are also pretty special in the sense that there's not many places in the world where you can pull that off on such a consistent basis. But what I think it's really important for people around the world to understand that we also can harvest our grapes earlier, and with this consistent climate, we can make really balanced wines at moderate sugar levels if we choose to. And so it's sort of like the ripening. You have like a 6-week period of ripening where you can kind of stylistically decide when to harvest. And so you don't have just, if you choose not to max it out, you're still very much honoring the terroir. It's a fairly unusual winemaking region in that it allows a lot of room for various different visions basically to be executed. And so for us, harvesting earlier is basically how it used to be done here. I mean, so the Napa wines in the 60s and 70s and 80s were 12% alcohol Cabernet. And it really got into the 13% alcohols in like late 80s into the 90s. And so there's nothing new about what we're doing. We're going back to an older mentality and style. And so internationally, it's always a challenge for us because we do have, our region is typecast. I feel like sometimes we have similarities to like Beaujolais, which is typecast with Beaujolais Nouveau, or Vinho Verde in Portugal is really typecast with like, light sparkling
Spritzing,
white wines when they, there's lots of, so you have these regions that become typecast for various different reasons. And we kind of suffer from that now, which is a challenge for me when we try to tell our story internationally but the wonderful thing is that this same, farm to table sort of like, restaurants and chefs that are infatuated with the possibilities of fresh produce, that scene is worldwide, and that's our world. And so like in London, a restaurant like the Clove Club, they're like in Copenhagen, a restaurant like Geranium, all over the world, there are folks that are passionate about, their local cuisine and wines, and want to have wines that really reflect the values as well as, taste experience kind of go with it. And so that's our world in the world. And I think that in that case, people have really gotten behind what we're doing because hopefully people find the wines are delicious, but it's also that they stand for something, because it's about trying to return to a balance and a certain simplicity where you sort of get out of the way and get back to like really appreciating the fruit, but in a sense of craftsmanship and which is really important. And, because we want you to be able to taste the fruit. And so there's a lot of craft involved as well. And I think that restaurants can see that and gravitate towards it.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Steve Matthiasson of Matthiasson Wines. An absolutely cracking way to close the series. Do be sure to visit Matthiasson.com, where you can learn more about his fascinating project and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/493. You can find links to all episodes from the series in the description below if you'd like to catch up. I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. That does unfortunately bring the Napa Valley series to a close for now. All that's left to say is a huge thank you to all 5 guests. It was absolutely fascinating talking to you all, and I'm so happy we got to share this with the audience. Speaking of which, make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine Podcast to be alerted when the next series goes live. See you then.